Story 1. The Eyes That Never Sleep. I never thought I'd be moving cities at 42. The transfer to Savannah came as a blessing in disguise, or so I believed at the time. The supervisor position at the paper mill promised stability after difficult years in Atlanta. And the house I rented in the Victorian district seemed perfect. 2 bedrooms, small yard, rent that fit my budget. The realtor didn't mention why the price was so low for that area. I should have been suspicious. The first thing that caught my attention were the mirrors, an enormous one in the master bedroom, covering half the wall beside the bed. Another smaller one in the bathroom, but still disproportionately large for the space. Both had antique frames, crafted in dark wood that seemed to swallow the light around them. When I questioned the landlady, Mrs. Henderson, she simply said they were part of the original decor, and it would be cheaper to keep them than remove them. I accepted the deal without hesitation. Big mistake. The first few weeks were normal. I worked 7 to 4, came home tired, watched TV, and slept. The routine of a simple man trying to rebuild his life in a new city. The neighbors were cordial but distant, typical of the South. Nothing that bothered me. It was on a Thursday in March that I noticed the first strange sign. I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty. The clock read 3:17. I got up from bed still drowsy and walked to the bathroom without turning on the light. I knew the way by heart after 3 weeks in the place. As I passed by the mirror, an icy sensation ran down my spine. I stopped. I slowly turned my head toward the reflection. For a split second, I swear I saw a silhouette behind me. Not my silhouette, another person, taller, motionless. I turned on the light in a sharp movement. Nothing, just my pale and frightened reflection staring back at me. I took a deep breath, drank water and went back to bed, convincing myself it had been imagination, moving stress, adaptation to the new job, things the mind creates when it's overloaded. But the ice in my stomach remained until morning. After that night, I began avoiding looking directly at the mirrors in the dark. When I needed to use the bathroom during the night, I'd turn on the light first. In the bedroom, I slept, facing away from the mirror. Small adjustments that gave me a sense of control. The feeling of being watched, however, only grew. It was subtle at first, a tickle on the back of my neck when I was in the room, the impression of peripheral movement when I brushed my teeth. Nothing I could prove or explain to anyone. I started coming home and greeting the empty walls in a pathetic attempt to break the silence that seemed to intensify each day. A week after the first incident, I decided to cover the bedroom mirror before sleeping. I took an old sheet and stretched it over the entire mirrored surface, securing the corners with tape. Problem solved, I muttered, satisfied with my practical solution. If I couldn't see the mirror, there would be no more disturbing imaginings. I slept heavily that night. I woke up refreshed at 6 a.m. The sheet was on the floor, perfectly folded at the foot of the bed. I stood there for long minutes looking at the folded fabric. I tried to find rational explanations: inadequate ventilation, poor quality tape, movement during sleep. All sounded fragile, but they were all I had to hold on to. I repeated the process that night, using stronger tape and securing the sheet at more points. I also placed a weight at each bottom corner, 2 heavy books I'd found at a yard sale. I woke up at 4:33 a.m. The sheet was again on the floor, folded in the same meticulous way. The books remained where I'd left them, but the fabric lay there as if someone had taken care to remove it without making noise and organize it with care. My heart raced. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, checking for signs of invasion. Nothing. The front door remained locked from inside, chain in place. Windows the same. No indication that anyone had entered the house, but someone or something had removed that sheet. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, drinking coffee and trying to process the impossible. When the sun rose, the light brought a false sense of normalcy. I convinced myself again that there was a logical explanation. I just needed to figure out what. During the day at work, I casually mentioned to Mr. Williams, the oldest security guard at the mill, that I was having strange nights in the new house. "House in the Victorian district?" he asked, interrupting his coverage about the weather. "Yes, why?" Mr. Williams looked at me strangely, as if evaluating how much he could reveal. After a few seconds, he shook his head and mumbled, "Nothing, son. Small town, you know. Everyone knows everyone." But I could tell he knew something. That night, I decided not to cover the mirror. If something was happening, I would face it head on. I placed a chair strategically positioned, to watch the reflection without looking directly at it, and pretended to sleep. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Sleep was beginning to win when I heard, or thought I heard, a subtle noise, like fabric being dragged against a smooth surface. I opened my eyes slowly and looked at the mirror through the reflection in the turned-off TV screen. My blood froze. There was someone in the room. Not in the real room, only in the reflection. A tall, thin figure wearing dark clothes, standing exactly behind my bed, completely motionless like a statue. I turned my head abruptly backward. Nothing. I looked at the reflection again. The figure was still there, but now seemed to be watching me. I couldn't see facial features in the darkness, just the silhouette and 2 points of light where the eyes should be. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the room lights. I searched every corner, looked under the bed, inside the closet. Nothing. But when I looked at the mirror, my reflection was different, pale, sweating, with an expression of terror that didn't correspond to what I was feeling at that exact moment. It was as if the mirror showed my emotional state with a few seconds' delay. The next morning, I sought out Mrs. Garcia, my neighbor on the left, a 70-year-old lady who had lived on the street for decades and knew the history of every house. "Oh, my dear," she sighed when I mentioned the mirrors and strange experiences. "I was hoping you'd ask sooner." We sat in her kitchen, drinking coffee, while she told a story that would change my perception forever. That house belonged to Michael Thompson, a guy about your age. Lived alone, worked at City Hall. Good person, but kind of different. Obsessed with mirrors. Said through them he could see things others couldn't. Mrs. Garcia paused, stirring sugar in her coffee with slow, deliberate movements. About 5 years ago, we started noticing he wasn't leaving the house anymore. Weeks without seeing him. When City Hall sent someone to check, they found him in the bedroom, sitting in front of the big mirror, dead for at least a week. My cup trembled in my hands. How did he die? Doctors said it was cardiac arrest, but she lowered her voice. His expression was terrible, like he had seen something that scared him to death, and the mirrors were covered when they found the body. Covered? From behind. Yeah, there was black paint on the back of the mirrors, applied recently, like he had tried to prevent them from reflecting something, but it didn't work, apparently. I left Mrs. Garcia's house with trembling legs. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a terrifying puzzle. Michael Thompson had seen the same thing I had, and it had killed him. From that conversation on, I developed an unhealthy obsession with the mirrors. During the day at work, I kept thinking about what could be watching me through them. At night, I couldn't relax, always vigilant, always waiting to see something that shouldn't be there. I began taking mental notes, times of sightings, weather conditions, my emotional state, trying to find a pattern, logic behind the impossible. The apparitions became more frequent, always the same tall, thin figure, always motionless, always watching me. For a few days I tried to interact with it. I asked questions to the mirror, gestured, waved, no reaction. But the eyes, those 2 points of light, never left me. One night something different happened. I was lying on my side, pretending to sleep, when I noticed movement in the reflection. Not the usual stationary figure, but real movement, as if someone was walking around the room. I turned my eyes to the corner and managed to follow through the window's reflection a silhouette moving slowly around my bed. 3 complete circles. Slowly, deliberately. When the figure stopped at the foot of the bed, right in my line of sight, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was Michael Thompson. I recognized the face from the photo Mrs. Garcia had shown me, an old portrait she kept from the times when they talked over the fence. But there was something terribly wrong with his appearance. The skin had a grayish color, as if it were wet. The eyes were completely white, without pupils, and the mouth was open in a silent scream that seemed to last forever. He looked at me with an expression of absolute despair. Unable to contain myself, I turned abruptly to face him directly. Nothing, just the empty, dark room. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was still there, now pointing to something behind me. I followed the direction of his finger and saw in the reflection that the room's walls were covered with mirrors. Not just the 2 original ones, but dozens of them of all sizes, covering every inch of surface. And in each one, there was a different figure. Men, women, children, all with the same expression of terror and despair. All dead, all trapped. I spent the next 3 days researching the house on the internet and in City Hall archives. What I discovered was even more disturbing than my nightly visions. The house wasn't old. It had been built in 1987, but the land had history. There had operated between 1934 and 1952 a funeral home. Entire families were waked in that space, with large mirrors installed so visitors could tidy themselves before paying their last respects to the dead. The funeral home closed after a series of strange incidents. People reported seeing movements in the mirrors during wakes. Families who refused to return after inexplicable experiences. The owner, a man named Sebastian Miller, went insane and was institutionalized, claiming the dead didn't want to leave the mirrors. Michael Thompson knew this. He had researched the place's history before moving, but believed he could communicate with the trapped spirits. The notes I found in his old office at City Hall revealed a growing obsession with the paranormal and a conviction that he could help lost souls. He tried and failed. Now it was my turn to decide: flee or try to break the cycle. On a Friday, after a week without sleeping properly, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly terrorized in my own house. If Michael was trying to warn me about something, I needed to find out what. I bought candles, rock salt, and all the utensils that online research suggested for spiritual cleansing. I didn't completely believe in these things, but was willing to try anything. I came home determined. I lit candles around the room, made a circle of salt around the bed, and positioned myself directly in front of the large mirror. "Michael," I spoke aloud, feeling idiotic but persisting, "if you're there, I need to understand what you want." For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his figure began to materialize in the reflection, but this time it was different. He seemed clearer, more real. He was trying to speak. I approached the mirror until my face was inches from the surface. I concentrated on reading his lips. "Don't look behind." My blood froze. Slowly, very slowly, I began to turn my head. In the mirror's reflection, I saw I wasn't alone in the room. There were dozens of figures behind me, all the people who had died in that funeral home, all who had become trapped in the mirrors over the years, and they were all moving in my direction. Michael gestured desperately, pointing to something in the corner of the mirror. Following his finger, I saw a small crack in the frame that I had never noticed before, a crack that pulsed with its own light. "Break the mirror," I managed to read on his lips. I understood. It was the only way out, but if I broke the mirror while looking at it, I risked being trapped too. I needed to do it without looking directly at the reflection. I took the hammer I kept in the drawer and, closing my eyes tightly, raised my arm. "I'm sorry," I whispered to all the trapped souls. "I'll try to free you." I brought the hammer down with all the strength I had. The sound was deafening, not just the sound of breaking glass, but screams. Hundreds of sharp, desperate screams that seemed to come from inside the mirror itself. The room's temperature plummeted instantly. My breath became visible, and I felt as if thousands of cold hands were touching me at the same time. Then, absolute silence. I opened my eyes. The mirror lay in pieces on the floor, each fragment reflecting only my relieved face. No other figures, no ghostly gazes. I was free. I moved out the following week. I couldn't sleep in that house anymore, even with the mirrors destroyed. The feeling of having been watched for so long had left deep marks on my psyche. Mrs. Garcia helped me with the move. When I told her what had happened, she just nodded, as if she knew it would come to that outcome. "You were brave," she said. Michael tried the same thing, but couldn't gather the courage to break the mirror. He kept looking until they took him along. Today I live in another neighborhood, in a modern house without large mirrors, just a small one in the bathroom that I avoid using during the night. Sometimes when I pass by old houses or antique shops, I feel a familiar tickle on my neck, as if something were watching me through reflective surfaces. I learned that some places keep echoes of the past, and that we can't always completely escape them. We can only break the cycles that bind us, but one thing haunts me to this day. The night before moving, when I was packing the last things, I found a photo at the bottom of the bedroom drawer. An old photo in black and white of the funeral home that operated on that land decades ago. In the center of the image, among the coffins and flowers, was a large mirror with an ornate frame, exactly like the one I had broken. And in it, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present, was my reflection. A photo taken 50 years before I was born. Story 2. The man who wasn't me. Accepting the job in Sacramento was the best decision I'd made in years, or at least that's what I thought when I signed the contract with the pharmaceutical distributor. After 3 years unemployed in Portland, the opportunity to start over as a warehouse manager in a California city seemed like a gift from heaven. The house I rented in the Midtown district was simple, but functional. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, American kitchen, and a bathroom that, for some incomprehensible architectural reason, had 2 entrances. One through the hallway and another through the master bedroom. The landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, explained that the house had belonged to his mother, who had died the previous year. She loved mirrors, he said with a melancholic smile while showing me the property. Said they brought light to the rooms. There really were mirrors. One occupied almost the entire wall of the bedroom, from bed height to the ceiling. Another in the bathroom, strategically located to be seen from both entrances. Both had ornate frames that clearly had value, but strangely combined with the simplicity of the rest of the decor. I should have asked why she needed so many mirrors. The first few weeks were peaceful. I worked from 8 to 6, came home tired, heated something in the microwave, and watched TV before sleeping. Simple routine of a 38-year-old single man trying to get back on his feet after a difficult period. The first strange sign happened on a Tuesday at the end of April. I had dozed off on the couch watching the late news. I woke up around 2 a.m. with a sore neck and the TV still on, broadcasting those old programs they show during the night. I got up to go sleep in bed when something made me stop in the middle of the hallway. The bathroom mirror was illuminated. Not by electric light. The bulbs were off. It was a soft, bluish luminosity, as if the glass itself emitted light. For a few seconds, I was hypnotized by the sight, until the luminosity gradually faded, leaving only the normal reflection of a mirror in the dark. I turned on the bathroom light and examined the surface. Nothing out of the ordinary. Clean glass, intact frame, perfect reflection. I attributed the episode to fatigue and the impromptu nap on the couch, but an uncomfortable sensation remained with me for the rest of the night. It was from the following week that I began to notice other subtle anomalies, always related to the mirrors. When I brushed my teeth in the morning, sometimes I had the impression that my reflection took a split second to follow my movements, as if there were an almost imperceptible lag between action and reaction in the glass. I tested it a few times, making abrupt movements with my head, but I could never objectively confirm what I was seeing. The bedroom mirror also began to bother me, especially during the nights when I woke up to go to the bathroom. Even in total darkness, I felt as if someone were watching me through the reflective surface. I would turn on the light to check, but always found only my own reflection staring back at me, with an expression of nervousness that didn't correspond to what I was feeling. One night I decided to do a test. I placed a chair in front of the bedroom mirror and sat for a few minutes observing my reflection in the dim light. For about 15 minutes, nothing happened. I was about to give up when I noticed something disturbing. My reflection was smiling. I wasn't smiling. I had a neutral expression, slightly bored, but the man in the mirror displayed a subtle and disturbing smile. I got up from the chair quickly and turned on the light. My reflection returned to normal instantly. I spent the rest of the night awake, questioning my mental sanity. During the following week, I intensified my observation of the mirrors. I did small, regular tests, sudden movements, grimaces, deliberate gestures. Most of the time, everything seemed normal, but occasionally, always when I least expected it, I caught disturbing inconsistencies. The reflection that blinked when I didn't blink, the expression that didn't correspond to what I was feeling, movements that started before mine. On a Thursday, something happened that completely changed my perception of the situation. I was shaving in the bathroom when I noticed my reflection was wearing a blue shirt. I looked down. I was shirtless, as I always was when shaving. I looked at the mirror again. Now the reflection was correct, shirtless, like me. But for a few seconds, I'm absolutely certain the man in the mirror wore a blue shirt I didn't own. That night, I decided to talk to Mr. Rodriguez about the house's history. I found Mr. Rodriguez at a nearby coffee shop on Saturday morning. He was a 60-year-old man, retired from the electric company, and seemed to enjoy talking about old times. When I casually mentioned I was getting used to the house's mirrors, his expression changed subtly. "My mother had an obsession with them," he said, stirring sugar in his coffee with slow movements. "Always had since I can remember. She said through mirrors she could see people who had already died, relatives, not just anyone who had some connection to the house. When I was little, she would show me faces in mirrors and say, "Look there, your grandfather or your Aunt Maria is visiting us." I never saw anything, but she would spend hours talking to the reflections. "Mr." Rodriguez paused as if deciding how much he should reveal. "In the last months before dying, she became different. Said she was seeing a young man in the mirrors, someone she didn't know. She was worried, thinking he was lost and needed help finding his way." My stomach contracted. "How did she describe this man? About your age, brown hair, a little bald at the temples?" "He always appeared in her bedroom mirror, which is the same as your bedroom now, and stayed there for hours, sometimes moving his lips as if trying to talk to her. The description corresponded perfectly to my appearance." "Mr. Rodriguez," I asked with a trembling voice, "when exactly did your mother start seeing this man?" "Let me see. It was around March last year, thereabouts." "March last year. Exactly when I started looking for work in Sacramento, months before moving to the city." I returned home with my mind in turmoil. The pieces were fitting together in a terrifying way. Mrs. Rodriguez had seen me in the mirrors months before I even knew that house existed. This meant that somehow I was already connected to that place before even moving. But how? That night I decided to try a different approach. Instead of avoiding or testing the mirrors, I decided to try to communicate directly with them. I sat in front of the bedroom mirror around 10 p.m. with all lights off except a small lamp beside the bed. I remained silent for almost an hour, just observing. Gradually, my reflection began to change. Not dramatically, the alterations were subtle, almost imperceptible. The posture became slightly different, the expression more alert. The eyes seemed to shine with a light that didn't correspond to the room's lighting. "Who are you?" I whispered to the mirror. My reflection moved its lips, but I couldn't understand the words. It was like watching someone speak from the other side of thick glass. I concentrated intensely, trying to read the lip movements. "I am you." I got up from the chair abruptly, turning on all the room lights. My reflection returned to normal immediately. A middle-aged man, scared and confused, staring back at me. But for a split second, before the lights came on completely, I saw he was wearing the blue shirt again. I spent the following days researching paranormal phenomena related to mirrors. The internet was full of theories about independent reflections and specular doppelgangers, but nothing that satisfactorily explained what I was experiencing. It was on an obscure parapsychology site that I found something that chilled my blood. An article about temporal projection through reflective surfaces described cases where people reported seeing versions of themselves from different time periods. According to the theory, mirrors in places with strong spiritual activity could function as bridges between different moments of a person's existence. The explanation sounded absurd, but began to make horrible sense with my situation. Mrs. Rodriguez had seen me in the mirror months before I moved to the house. This meant she was seeing a future version of me. And now I was seeing what? A past or future version, or maybe something completely different. That night, I decided to definitively confront my reflection. I waited until 2 a.m. to be sure I was completely awake and alert. I sat in front of the bedroom mirror with paper and pen, determined to establish real communication with whatever was on the other side. At first, my reflection behaved normally, but after about 20 minutes of patient observation, the differences began to appear. First, the posture became more erect. Then the expression changed to something I could only describe as amused curiosity. The eyes began to shine with that strange light again. I wrote on the paper, "What do you want?" My reflection looked at what I had written, smiled, and began to write on a paper that didn't exist in the real world. When he finished, he held up the paper for me to read. "To take your place." My blood froze. I wrote another question. "Why?" The reflection wrote again, "Because I'm trapped. You freed me by coming here." "Who are you, really?" This time the reflection took longer to respond. When he did, his expression was sad. "I'm what you would have become if you had never left this house." I didn't understand. I wrote, "I never lived here before." "Yes, you did. In another time, another possibility. I'm the version of you that never left Sacramento, that never tried other cities, that stayed trapped in this reflection, waiting for someone to take my place." The explanation was insane, but strangely made sense. If mirrors could show different temporal versions of people, maybe I was seeing an alternate version of myself, someone who had made different choices and ended up trapped in that place. How do I get rid of you? You don't. Every night I become more real and you become more reflection. Soon the exchange will be complete. I threw the pen across the room and got up from the chair. When I looked at the mirror again, my reflection was standing in the same position, but he was smiling and slowly shaking his head as if saying no. For the first time since moving to the house, I was truly terrified. The following days were a nightmare. I started noticing that my reflection was becoming increasingly independent. Sometimes when I looked at mirrors during the day, I saw that the man on the other side was doing different things than me. While I worked at the warehouse, colleagues began commenting that I seemed different. More confident, they said, but also colder. I didn't feel different, but apparently something was changing. At night, my conversations with the reflection became more frequent and disturbing. He told me about the life he had lived or was living on the other side, a life identical to mine in many ways, but trapped in an endless loop in that house. Every day I wake up, go to work, come back, look in the mirror and see you, he explained. Until you came, I had no hope of escaping, but now I can slowly pass to your side while you pass to mine. And if I leave the house, you can't anymore. The exchange has already begun. Try to leave and you'll see. I tried. I packed my things and got in the car, but when I reached the city limits, I felt a terrible pain in my chest and an irresistible compulsion to return. As if an invisible rope were pulling me back to the house. The reflection was right, I was trapped. Weeks passed, the exchange continued. My colleagues at work began saying I was a completely different person. More efficient, they said, but without personality. As if I were acting like myself but wasn't really myself, because I wasn't. Every day, a little more of my essence passed to the other side, while the reflection became more real in my place. One night, I made a desperate decision. If I couldn't escape, maybe I could break the mirror and interrupt the process. I took a hammer and positioned myself in front of the bedroom mirror. "I'm sorry," I said to my reflection, "but I can't let this continue." My reflection smiled sadly and shook his head. "Breaking the mirror won't help. The exchange is almost complete. Look at your hands." I looked. My hands were becoming translucent. I could see through them. "In a few more days, the process will be irreversible. She'll be completely on your side, and you'll be trapped in the reflection forever." "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because I've been trapped here for decades, waiting for someone like me to take my place. It's not personal, it's survival." I lowered the hammer. There was no point in breaking the mirror if the damage was already done. Today, 3 months later, I'm almost completely on the other side. I can still interact with the real world, but each day it becomes more difficult. People look through me as if I'm not really there. And my reflection? He's living my life now. He goes to work, pays my bills, maintains my relationships. For everyone else, he is me. Sometimes I try to warn new people who visit the house, but they can't see me clearly. I'm just a shadow in the mirror, a trick of light. Soon I'll be completely trapped, and the cycle will continue. The reflection that took my place will wait for the next person like us to come and take his place. And the mirrors in Sacramento will continue their patient work, exchanging souls with the precision of cosmic clockwork. If you're reading this, it means my reflection managed to post this story online. He's trying to attract someone like us to the house. Don't come. Don't let curiosity win. The mirrors are always hungry and the exchanges never stop. Story 3. Reflections of a Dead Man. The transfer to Phoenix came as a lifeline. After losing my job at a steel mill in Detroit and being unemployed for 8 months, the technician position at an animal feed factory in Arizona seemed like the perfect opportunity to start over. I found the house through a classified ad in the local paper. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, large yard, rent within what I could afford. The owner, Mr. Davis, was an elderly man who lived in Tucson and rarely visited the property. We closed the deal over the phone, with him sending the keys by mail. "Just one thing," he said during our last phone conversation. "The house has some antique mirrors that belong to my family. They're kind of large, but they add value to the property. I hope you don't mind." I didn't mind. Actually, I thought it would be good to have decent mirrors after months living in a tiny apartment without even one to shave properly. I should have asked why he made a point of mentioning that specifically. I arrived in Phoenix on a Tuesday in August, driving my pickup loaded with the few belongings I had managed to keep after the difficult months. The house was in the Desert View neighborhood, on a quiet street with old houses and many trees. The property was bigger than I expected from the photos. 1980s construction, well-maintained, with a front garden that needed care but had good potential. The first impression was positive. I entered carrying the first boxes and immediately encountered the first mirror. It occupied almost the entire wall of the living room. An impressive piece, with a golden frame worked in floral reliefs that clearly had decades of age. The glass was crystalline, perfectly reflecting the environment, but there was something in the depth of the reflection that caused me slight discomfort, as if it were deeper than it should be. The second mirror was in the master bedroom, even larger than the living room one, covering the entire wall behind the headboard. This one had a dark wood frame, almost black, with carvings that seemed to represent interconnected human figures. In the main bathroom, a third oval mirror decorated the wall above the sink, all impeccably clean, all reflecting with disturbing clarity. I finished unloading the truck and organized the basic furniture. When night fell, I noticed the mirrors created an interesting effect in the house. They seemed to amplify any light source, making the rooms brighter than they should be with just one bulb lit. An effect I would soon discover was the least of the problems. In the first weeks, my routine was simple. I woke up at 6, worked 7 to 4 at the factory, came home tired, had a quick dinner, and watched TV before sleeping. The mirrors were just part of the decoration, useful for checking my appearance before leaving in the morning. It was on a Thursday, 3 weeks after moving, that I noticed the first anomaly. I was in the bathroom shaving before work when I noticed my reflection was wearing a different shirt than what I was wearing. I looked down, light blue shirt, as I always wore to work. I looked at the mirror again. My reflection wore a red shirt. I blinked several times, shook my head, even left, and came back to the bathroom. The reflection had corrected itself. Blue shirt, as it should be. I attributed the episode to fatigue and adaptation to the new job, but a strange sensation stayed with me throughout that day. The following night, I decided to pay more attention to the mirrors. I positioned myself in front of the living room mirror and observed my reflection for a few minutes. Everything normal. Synchronized movements, correct expression, appropriate clothes. I was about to give up when something happened that chilled my blood. My reflection blinked. I hadn't blinked. From that night on, I began to mentally document all the inconsistencies I observed in the mirrors. They weren't constant. Most of the time, the reflections behaved normally, but occasionally, always when I least expected it, I caught small, disturbing discrepancies. The reflection that moved a split second before me, the expression that didn't correspond to my emotional state, the gaze that seemed focused on something slightly to my left instead of directly at me. One night, while watching TV in the living room, I noticed my reflection in the large mirror wasn't watching TV. It was staring fixedly at me with an expression of intense curiosity, as if studying every detail of my behavior. I turned abruptly to face the mirror directly. My reflection was normal, looking at the TV like me. I began to avoid looking at mirrors unnecessarily. A week later, something happened that completely changed my perception of the situation. It was Saturday, around 11 p.m. I was in the bedroom reading a book in bed when I noticed movement in the mirror behind me. I didn't turn my head immediately. I pretended to continue reading while observing the reflection from the corner of my eye. There was someone in the room. Not in the real room, only in the mirror's reflection. A male figure, approximately my age, sitting in a chair that didn't exist in the real environment. He was watching me attentively, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. I turned slowly backward. Nothing. The room was empty, just my furniture and the usual mess of a single man. I looked at the mirror again. The figure was still there, now clearly aware that I had noticed him. He waved at me, a slow, deliberate wave. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the room lights. The reflection returned to normal instantly. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, trying to process what I had seen. For the first time since moving, I seriously considered the possibility that something supernatural was happening in that house. On Sunday, I drove to downtown and looked for the municipal library. I wanted to research the house's history and Mr. Davis's family. If something paranormal was happening, there should be a historical explanation. The librarian, a lady named Mrs. Johnson, knew practically all the local history. When I mentioned the address and the owner's name, her expression changed visibly. "Ah, the Davis house," she said, lowering her voice instinctively. "Traditional family in the city. Too bad what happened to the youngest son." "What happened?" "Marcus Davis was a guy about your age." Worked many years as an accountant here at City Hall. Lived alone in that house after his parents died. Good person, but kind of eccentric. Mrs. Johnson led me to a section of archived local newspapers and found an edition from 2018. He died strangely, she continued, flipping through the pages. They found him in the bedroom, sitting in front of the big mirror. He'd been dead for several days when they discovered him. Official cause was heart attack, but the people who found the body said there was something wrong with the scene. Marcus was sitting in a chair, staring fixedly at the mirror, with a notebook in his lap full of strange notes, as if he had spent days observing and writing down something. My blood froze. The description corresponded exactly to what I had seen in the reflection the night before. What kind of notes? Never knew the details. Mr. Davis, Marcus's older brother, collected all the personal belongings and never wanted to talk about the subject. The house stayed closed until you rented it. I left the library with more questions than answers. Marcus Davis had died observing the same mirror that was now in my bedroom, and I was seeing his figure in the reflection, doing exactly what he was doing when he died. That night, I decided to try a different approach. If Marcus was trying to communicate with me through the mirror, I would try to communicate back. I positioned a chair in front of the bedroom mirror, took a notebook and pen, and sat exactly as I had seen the figure do. I waited. For about an hour, nothing happened. I was starting to feel ridiculous when I noticed a subtle change in the reflection. The lighting became slightly different, as if there were an additional light source I couldn't identify. Gradually, Marcus's figure began to materialize in the mirror, first as a vague shadow, then with more defined contours. He was sitting in a chair identical to mine, holding a notebook identical to mine. When our gazes met through the glass, he smiled sadly and raised his notebook. There was something written on the open page. I concentrated intensely to read what was written. The letters seemed to form slowly. You need to leave this house. I wrote in my own notebook. Why? Marcus consulted his notebook again and wrote a response that appeared on his page. The mirrors aren't normal. They capture souls. What followed was the most disturbing conversation of my life. A conversation through notebooks with a dead man who was trapped in the mirrors of the house. Marcus explained that the mirrors had belonged to his great-grandfather, a man who had gotten involved with the occult in the early 20th century. They weren't just decorative mirrors, they were ritualized objects, created specifically to capture and imprison human souls. The whole family knew, but no one believed they actually worked. He wrote, "Until I started seeing the other people trapped here." Other people? Dozens of them. Previous residents of the house, visitors who stayed too long, all trapped in the reflections. How did you die? I didn't die. My body died, but I was sucked into the mirrors. That's what they do. They drain life force until the body can no longer sustain the soul. The explanation was terrifying, but made sense with everything I had observed. The independent reflections, the inconsistencies, the feeling of being watched. All were signs that the mirrors were trying to capture my soul. How can I escape? Leave the house immediately. Don't take anything that has been exposed to the mirrors for too long, and never look back. And you, the people trapped? Marcus took a long time to respond. When he did, his expression was laden with sadness. There's no way to free us, but you can still save yourself. I didn't waste time. As soon as the sun rose, I began packing only the essentials. Clothes that had been stored in drawers, important documents, some personal items that had never been directly exposed to the mirrors. Throughout the process, I carefully avoided looking at any reflective surface. I could feel the mirrors pulling my attention, like they had developed a magnetic force over me. Several times I had to fight the impulse to look at them one more time. I loaded the car quickly and called Mr. Davis, inventing an excuse about urgent family problems that required my return to Detroit. He didn't ask questions, just said he would send someone to pick up the keys. Before leaving, I left a letter on the kitchen table, not for Mr. Davis, but for the next tenant who would inevitably come. I told the whole truth about the mirrors, about Marcus, about the danger. I knew it would probably be ignored, but I had to try to warn them. I got in the car and started the engine, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could feel the weight of the mirrors even from outside the house, as if they were trying to draw me back. When I was leaving the street, I couldn't resist. I looked in the rearview mirror. All the mirrors in the house were turned toward the front window, reflecting something I couldn't see clearly from the distance, but there was movement in them. Dozens of figures moving around as if trying to follow me. I accelerated and didn't look back again. I returned to Detroit and got a temporary job at an auto shop. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe. During the first months, I completely avoided mirrors larger than a palm. I shaved with a pocket mirror, bought clothes without trying them on, avoided public bathrooms with large mirrors. Gradually, the feeling of being pursued diminished. I began to sleep through entire nights without nightmares about independent reflections. Life returned to normal, or at least what could be considered normal after an experience like that. 6 months later, I received a call from Mr. Davis. "Robert, you didn't leave any forwarding address for us to send your mail. Several letters arrived for you." "Mail? But I didn't give that address to anyone." "Strange. There are several letters, all from different senders. Want me to open one to see what it's about?" I hesitated. Something told me I didn't want to know the content of those letters. "No, you can discard them. It can't be anything important." "Are you sure? Some have your photo." My blood froze. "My photo?" "Yeah, photos of you inside the house. But they're strange. They seem to have been taken by someone who was watching you from far away, and in some you seem to be looking directly at whoever was photographing, but your eyes are different." I hung up the phone with trembling hands. For weeks, I tried to forget Mr. Davis's call, but the photos haunted me. How could someone have photographed me inside the house? I had always lived alone there. And what did different eyes mean? Curiosity eventually overcame fear. One Saturday morning, I drove back to Phoenix. Not to enter the house, I would never do that again. Just to observe from afar, maybe talk to neighbors, try to understand what was happening. The house was exactly as I had left it, but there was something different about the windows. The internal mirrors were positioned so they reflected outward, creating flashes of light that could be seen from the street. I stayed at a safe distance and observed for a few minutes. Occasionally, I caught movement in the reflections visible through the windows, figures moving from side to side, as if the house were inhabited. It was then I noticed I wasn't alone on the street. There was a man standing on the opposite sidewalk, observing the house with the same intensity as me. A middle-aged man, thin, wearing simple clothes. He was holding something in his hands. It looked like a camera. When our gazes met, he waved at me and crossed the street. "Are you Robert?" he asked, approaching my car. "Yes? How do you know my name?" "I'm John Davis, Marcus's brother. I received your letter." My stomach contracted. I hadn't written any letter to Marcus's family. "What letter?" John took an envelope from his pocket and showed it to me. It was addressed to him with my name as sender, and the handwriting was unmistakably mine, but I had never written that letter. "It arrived last week," he said, opening the envelope. "You tell details about what happened to my brother and asked me to come here to photograph the mirrors. You say it's urgent." I took the letter with trembling hands and read it. It was my handwriting, my writing style, my signature, but I didn't remember writing a single word of it. The letter contained details about my experience in the house that I had never told anyone. It also revealed information about Marcus that I didn't know, like the fact that he had tried to destroy the mirrors years before dying, but couldn't because they were protected by some kind of magic. "The photos I took are disturbing," John continued, showing me a digital camera. "Want to see?" Against my better judgment, I accepted. The photos showed the house's interiors through the windows. In all of them, the mirrors reflected human figures, dozens of them. Some I recognized. Marcus was there sitting in his eternal chair. Others were unknown, but in one of the photos in the living room mirror, there was me. Not a past version of me, but me from the present, wearing exactly the clothes I was wearing at that moment, sitting in the driver's seat of my car, looking at the photos on John's camera. It was a photo taken a few seconds before he showed it to me. I ran from that street like my life depended on it. John shouted behind me, but I didn't stop to listen. I drove back to Detroit in total panic, trying to process the impossible. The mirrors had captured me. Not completely. My body was still free, could still move through the real world, but an essential part of me, a part of my soul, had stayed trapped in that house. That's why my reflection had written the letter. That's why I appeared in photographs, even when I was far away. Part of my soul was forever imprisoned in the mirrors of Phoenix. During the following months, I tried to live normally, ignoring the growing signs that something was wrong. But it was impossible to escape reality. Photographs where my reflection appeared in places I wasn't. People who reported seeing me in Phoenix when I was in Detroit. And mainly, The constant sensation of being incomplete, as if part of me were missing. Today, 3 years later, I've learned to live with my condition. I work, pay my bills, maintain superficial relationships. To external observers, I'm a normal person, but I know the truth. Part of me is forever sitting in a chair in that house's bedroom in Phoenix, observing other residents who inevitably will come, trying to warn, trying to protect, failing repeatedly. I receive letters occasionally, letters that my reflection writes to people who might help new victims. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. John has become a kind of guardian of the house, regularly photographing the mirrors and documenting the souls trapped there. He tells me the number of figures in the reflections continues to grow, and that recently a new person moved into the house, a young engineer who got a job at a local company. John tried to warn him about the mirrors, but the guy thought it was superstition from desert folk. In the last photo I received, I can see this new resident in the living room mirror's reflection. He hasn't realized he's being watched yet. He still believes the small incidents with the mirrors are imagination, but I can already see the beginning of the capture in his eyes, and I, trapped between two worlds, watch helplessly as the cycle begins once more. The mirrors of Phoenix are always hungry, and they never completely release their prey. If you've made it this far, you're a true horror fan. Subscribe to Darkness Activity, like this video, and comment which story haunted you the most. We want to read every detail that gave you chills. Explore our other macabre videos.